You know, at Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. The air on the Sentinel orbital station tasted of acrid, superheated plating and burnt insulation, a breached power conduit's ghost. Commander Garrick Falco spat a thin wad of saliva tinged with pink onto the deck plating. The spittle sizzled for a moment, a small protest against the heat radiating through the floor. Emergency lighting strobed in a frantic, syncopated rhythm, casting the corridor in intermittent flashes of crimson and stark white. "Status comms," Falco barked, his voice a low growl, almost lost in the shriek of tearing metal and the wet, skittering clicks from the enemy.
"Still dead, Commander,"
came the reply from Sergeant Zoya Kovac, her words strained through the helmet speakers.
"Hardline's cut in the array of slag. We're on our own."
Falco grunted, pressing his back against a bulkhead that shuddered with a nearby impact. He glanced around the corner. The main concourse was a charnel house. Human bodies or their remains lay strewn amidst the kiosk wreckage and decorative planters. His focus snapped to the other things. The Kytron, a tide of shifting blades, each blade swarm a collective dozens of smaller metallic entities pulled apart and reassembled as they poured over the wreckage. They held the beauty of a collapsing star. Their burnished shells, forged in their extragalactic ark's metal-rich core, refracted the strobing emergency lights into dazzling, deadly rainbows. They moved past the dead. Private Dachi Hamaski muttered, his kinetic rifle pressed to his shoulder. "Just going for the living." "They're farmers, Dachi," Falco corrected, his tone flat. "And we're the crop." A fresh wave of them poured from a ruptured maintenance duct, their collective form coalescing into a bipedal shape, a brood warrior. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its limbs tapering to monomolecular edges that sheared through hull plating as if it were tallow.
"Kovac, suppressive fire! Hamaski, with me! We're falling back!"
Falco ordered. He broke cover, his own rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. His 10mm tungsten rounds, meant to punch through light armor, sparked and ricocheted off the warrior's chest. A few found purchase, chipping away metallic fragments, but the creatures shrugged off the impacts. Kovac's plasma thrower unleashed a torrent of incandescent energy. The superheated gas washed over the smaller blade forms, bullying their outer layers into clouds of hissing steam. But the effect was temporary. They flowed back together, their numbers barely diminished. The brood warrior took the blast full in the torso, its shell glowing cherry red. It staggered, a guttural screech echoing directly to their minds. A psychic shriek that felt like scraping nails inside their skulls. Falco cursed under his breath. Conventional warfare was a dialogue of force. You hit something, it broke. The Kytron operated on a different logic. They were a hostile ecosystem. Trying to shoot them was like trying to shoot the ocean.
"Engineering! We need to get to the primary coolant nexus!"
Falco yelled, dragging a wounded Hamaski behind a thick support pillar. A spray of creature acid laid the private's leg open to the bone. The deck around him was already dissolving. "The manual override for the core flush is there. We can vent it."
"They'll scour the entire station, Commander! That gives us a chance. This is a guaranteed grave!"
Falco retorted. He slapped a fist-sized injector of coagulant and painkillers against Hamaski's thigh. The private screamed, then slumped. His breathing grew faint. "We stomp them here, or they'll rain down on Ceres Primus inside the hour. Think of 5 million souls below." They decided immediately. They were soldiers. They traded their lives for others, the grim calculus of the profession. They pushed toward engineering, moving from cover to cover, a dwindling island in a sea of metallic death. The Kytron hive mind's psychic pressure grated on Falco, a constant abrasive static at the edge of his consciousness. It was an immense, unthinking hunger that scraped away strategy, leaving only the impulse to fight or flee. They lost Kovac at the final junction before the engineering sector. A blade swarm flowed over a barricade like water moving through her plasma fire. It engulfed her. The swarm pulsed once, a violent contraction, and then flowed on, cutting her screams short and leaving behind only her weapon, a few warped pieces of armor, and a dark, spreading stain. Falco shoved the image from his mind. Grief was a luxury for later. He dragged Hamaski's limp weight through the blast door, slamming the emergency lock shut. The station's dying heart replaced the clicking sounds with a low, groaning hum. The station's fusion core, a contained star, dominated the vast engineering bay. Coolant pipes, as thick as a man's torso, lined the walls, weeping cryogenic fluid that turned the air to shimmering fog.
Hamaski! Dachi! You with me?
Falco shook the private. The young soldier stirred slowly, opening his eyes in a flutter.
I think this is it for me, Commander. Stay with me, soldier.
Falco hauled him toward a raised catwalk where the override panel sat. The metal groaned under their combined weight. Outside, a rhythmic, heavy thudding drummed against the blast door. The brood warrior had followed them. Falco laid Hamaski down and turned to the panel. A thick armored casing protected the controls. He jammed a combat knife into the seam and pried it with all his strength. Metal screamed. The casing popped open, revealing a simple, archaic lever under a clear protective cover, a failsafe from a bygone era of engineering. The thudding on the door grew louder, the thick metal beginning to buckle inward.
They're so quiet.
Hamaski rasped, fixing his gaze on the ceiling.
When they kill you, just pressure and cold.
Falco kept his eyes on the lever. He flipped up the cover. His gauntleted hand rested on the control. This was it. The final bloody punctuation mark on a long losing sentence. The costly victory was a single sandbag against a rising flood. It would only delay the next swarm, or the one after.
Commander.
Hamaski's voice was a whisper.
Tell my mother I saw the Vel Nebula from the observation deck, and that it was beautiful.
I'll tell her, Dachi. Falco lied. His real report would be to the service pod's emergency beacon hidden in a level below, if he made it. With a final deafening shriek of tearing metal, the brood warrior's razor-edged claw punched through the blast door. Falco pulled the lever. For a silent heartbeat, nothing happened. A deep, resonant klaxon sounded, a mournful dirge for the station. A wave of intense heat, enough to melt steel, washed over him from the core. He threw himself over the railing, dropping 10 meters to the deck. The world dissolved into searing white light and the sound of screaming metal as the station's heart vented itself into space. The galactic conclave chamber in the fulcrum was an architectural marvel of unified purpose, a vast amphitheater carved from a single moon-sized asteroid. Light from a captive microstar glinted on the delegates from 1,000 worlds, each seated in floating semi-permeable pods. For all its grandeur, the chamber today felt small, the air thick with the day's single terrible topic. The Kydron. Ambassador Zyrella of Ve stood at the central podium. The intricate micromechanical patterns beneath her nacreous skin, which normally shifted in calming rhythmic waves, now locked in a static, troubled grid. A species that communicated as much through these subtle textural shifts as through their melodic language. The Ve's current stillness broadcast only grief. For 6 standard years, this body has debated. She spoke, and her voice filled the chamber's acoustic field. We have debated precedent, the threshold accords sanctity, and the philosophical implications of escalating our response. And while we debate, my people die. She gestured to the vast hollow display above her. The display activated, showing a Ve world, a paradise of delicate luminous cities and gentle methane seas. Another image replaced it. The same world, shattered. The cities were jagged ruins, the seas choked with a black, necrotic sludge. This was Ve Prime. She spoke, her voice trembling for a moment before she stilled it. My home world. Now, it's a graveyard,
a nursery for the monsters that assail us. The Kytran spurn every offer. They operate beyond negotiation. They are a plague, and they seek only to convert all that is living into more of themselves. A murmur spread through the assembled delegates. A hulking lithovoric chitin delegate ground its internal gizzard audibly in agitation. A silent floating Escheror delegate, a being of raw energy contained in a magnetic field, tightened its field, emitting a low, disapproving thrum. The threshold accords exist to prevent the very horror we now face. Plagues designed to rewrite the galaxy's ecosystem. Zarella continued as she swept her gaze across the chamber. I honored those accords, as did my people. But the accords govern wars between civilized peoples. A descriptor the Kytran defy. They are a biological singularity, a wildfire consuming the galaxy. We must be the flood that extinguishes it. And what do you propose, Ambassador? The voice was sharp, cutting through the chamber's acoustics. It belonged to the Cygnian delegate, a being of complex hydrocarbons suspended in a pressurized containment suit. That we unleash our own horrors, that we answer extinction with extinction. The Accords protect us from ourselves as much as from our enemies. Once broken, that seal will remain broken. The weapons you speak of, Ambassador, are indiscriminate once uncorked. My people are already extinct. She raised her voice in pitch and volume. What future are you protecting if only ghosts remain to live in it? We need a unified front. We need to sanction the use of any and all means necessary to halt this tide. We must meet this force with overwhelming force. The debate raged. Delegates from the core worlds argued for caution. Elders from ancient races preached patience, while those in the front lines pleaded for action. The debate deadlocked. Zarella watched them argue, a cold resolve solidifying within her, each speech, every point of order, and every citation of a treaty written for a galaxy that had ceased to exist. They wrapped themselves in the comfort of their laws while the universe burned down around them. In that cold place in her soul, a new thought took root. If the Conclave refused to act, someone else would have to. Later, in the silence of her private quarters aboard the Vade diplomatic vessel, Virella dismissed her aides. The moment the door chimed shut, she sagged against the cool, glowing wall and breathed in ragged bursts. The micromechanical tracery under her skin flared in chaotic, uncontrolled strobes of bruised purple. Show me the intelligence package from the Whispering Shadow, she commanded the room's archival system. File Epsilon 9, unedited. The air in the room's center warped, and a holographic display bloomed into existence, showing a combat recording, raw and unredacted, from the Vey Planetary Guard's last stand on Vey Prime. The audio was a cacophony of screams, the whine of Vey particle casters, and the alien clicking from the Kytran. The visual was worse. She forced herself to watch as the elegant spires of her city's central creche, a place of birth and life, a sacred nursery where the creche nurtured the young in communal pods, were overrun. The Kytrans swarmed through the halls, their metallic bodies a stark, brutal contrast to the gentle, flowing architecture of her people. They did more than kill. The footage zoomed in, the soldier's helmet cam shaking with his panicked breaths. A brood warrior pinned a Vey civilian, a young female, to the ground. Its bladed limbs held her fast. From its chest, a fleshy, obscene proboscis extended, plunging into the Vey's abdomen. The female convulsed, the patterns under her skin flashing a final, brilliant white before going out. The recording jumped. Hours, maybe days, had passed. The camera operator was hiding in a ventilation shaft looking down into the same creche. The dead had vanished. In their place, the Vey birthing pods, once filled with glowing, life-giving fluid, were now dark, opaque sacs of pulsing vein flesh. They twitched and writhed.
One sac split open. A viscous black fluid poured out, followed by a newly formed chitron bladeling. Sized like a Vey infant, it moved with twitching purpose, its metallic body already hardening in the air. It joined the swarm, another cell in the growing cancer. Zyrella fell to her knees, a choked sound in her throat. The threshold accords, a poem for a peaceful world that had ceased to exist. This was parasitism on a cosmic scale. The Cygnian delegate was wrong. This was survival versus extinction. The only question was who would survive. She fumbled for a moment to activate a secure, heavily encrypted comms channel, a back channel a human intelligence operative had given her months ago, one she had sworn to leave dormant. The contact designation was Hecate, Human Expeditionary Command. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the micro-patterns in her skin coalescing into a single hard line. "This is Ambassador Zyrella from the Vey," she whispered, her voice raw. "I need to speak with your leadership. We must discuss alternative solutions." Deep beneath the surface of Luna, an unlisted shielded briefing room, the air was thick with scrubbed oxygen and hours-old coffee. A massive holographic display dominated the room, showing a Milky Way star chart. A creeping crimson stain spread from the galaxy's edge, consuming star systems one by one. "The siege of Proxima has shattered the 5th and 8th fleets," General Augustus Kane stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He was a bull of a man, his uniform straining at the shoulders, his face a roadmap of old scars and new worries. "The Chiton Imperium has lost 2 of their 3 core worlds. The Vey are, effectively, a refugee species. Every conventional strategy we have employed has failed catastrophically. Our ships move at speeds that leave us vulnerable. Our weapons inflict minimal damage. Our losses mount beyond our capacity to replace them." He gestured and the display shifted, showing casualty projections. The numbers were astronomical. The graph's upward curve was vertical. "At the current rate of chitron expansion," Kane continued, "they will extinguish sentient life in this galactic arm in less than 5 standard years." Silence fell over the assembled officers of Human Command. They had seen the reports, but seeing it all laid out, the stark timeline of their own extinction, was another thing entirely. "The Conclave remains deadlocked," Kane said, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "They will debate the morality of survival until the Chitrons consume the last of them. Humanity stands alone, as we always have, and we will not go silently into the night." He turned to a man standing apart from the others, his form obscured by the room's low lighting. He was the general's opposite in every way, gaunt, almost skeletal, with a scholar's stoop and eyes so dark they seemed like voids in the room's low light. He wore a simple lab coat over a dark gray uniform, and he held himself with a stillness that was unnerving. "This is Dr. Bastian Orlov, head of our Xenobiological Warfare Division." Kane's introduction was curt. "Doctor?" Orlov stepped forward and he scanned the hardened military faces. He met their gazes, his expression holding a clinical detachment, as if they were observing a new species. "Gentlemen," Orlov said, his voice soft yet resonant, "you are thinking about this problem incorrectly. You speak of fleets and armies, of tactics and logistics. You are trying to fight a war, while the Chitron are waging a systematic infection." He tapped a control, and the display behind him shifted to a complex, rotating model of a Chitron cellular structure. "You fight an infection, not with bullets and bombs," Orlov said, a slight sharp smile touching his lips. "You combat it with something like phage therapy. You find a virus that targets a bacteria, and you let biology do the work for you. I am proposing Project Chimera." Orlov lowered his voice to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "A tailored synthetic retrovirus, a gene-drive contagion designed to seek out a specific, unique element in the Chitron genome and turn their own biology against them. Instead of burning them out, gentlemen, we will let them rot from within." An admiral in the front row paled.
My God, Orlov. That violates every treaty we've signed. That's galactic-scale biological warfare.
Orlov turned his dark eyes on the admiral.
The Kytran are outside all treaties. They are a flawed biological equation, and I intend to solve it. Your fleets have failed. Let me engage them on a battlefield where I can win. The genome.
General Kane stepped forward again, his hands tightening into fist.
Dr. Orlov needs one thing for his work. A live specimen. A healthy, intact brood warrior. He believes he can devise a method to capture one, but it will require a team of our best.
Everyone in the room turned to a single grainy image on the display's edge. A file photo of a man in scorched combat armor, his helmet off, his face grim. Commander Garrick Falco, the sole survivor from the Sentinel Station garrison.
He's seen him up close, King said. He initiated a full core flush and made it to a lifepod seconds before the station tore itself apart. He knows how they fight, and he burned his past away on that installation. He's the man for the job.
The asteroid mine Persephone's Folly was a corpse. The massive, hollowed-out rock tumbled through empty space, its communication systems dark, its docking lights cold. One of a dozen such outposts that had gone silent in the last week, another victim to the creeping Kytran tide. It was the perfect hunting ground. Commander Garrick Falco and his new squad, Strike Team Epsilon, drifted toward the mine's primary airlock. Their suits were matte black, their non-reflective surfaces swallowing starlight, making them little more than man-shaped holes in the starfield.
Remember the briefing.
Falco's voice crackled over the private squad channel.
Our objective is capture and capture only. Dr. Orlov's analysis from the Sentinel's log suggests a constant microvibration holds the brood warriors together. He thinks a focused decoherence charge will disrupt their interlocking forms, forcing a temporary collapse. Think of it as a taser for walking nightmares. Easy for him to say from his lab, muttered Specialist Gunner, the team's heavy weapons expert. Just stick to the plan, Gunner, Falco said, his voice flat. We go in quiet. We locate a lone warrior, stun it, and bag it. The science boys have a stasis containment unit on the shuttle. Simple extraction.
They entered the mine through a breach in the hull, a jagged wound where something large had punched its way through. Inside, the place was a zero-gravity maze of tunnels and caverns, the only light coming from their helmet lamps. Scars from Kytran claws marked the walls, and the only sound was their own breathing. They found the infestation in the central processing chamber, a vast cavern where refiners once processed raw ore. A sickly organic webbing, a cancerous biolumin network, coated every surface, pulsing with a faint, syncopated light that seemed to guide the hive's movements. In the cavern's center, a dozen brood warriors stood dormant like metallic statues in a grotesque garden.
Target acquired,
Falco whispered.
The one on the left. It stands apart from the others. Gunner, ready the decoherence charges. Sella, on overwatch. Move.
They moved silently through the zero-G environment, using magnetic boots to crawl along the walls. The air was thick with a cloying metallic scent. The hive's mind's familiar static prickled at Falco's consciousness, but it felt muted here, dormant. The creatures were sleeping, or whatever passed for it. They were within 20 meters when a floating piece of debris dislodged by Stella's movement bumped against a central warrior. It jerked its head up, its sensor array glowing with an internal crimson light. A psychic scream, sharp as a needle, lanced through Falco's skull. Instantly, all 12 warriors awoke.
Charges now, Gunner!
Falco roared, abandoning stealth. Gunner fired 2 decoherence grenades. They flew across the cavern, embedding themselves into the rock wall near their target. A low hum escalated into a high-frequency shriek, a vibration that rattled their bones, even through their suits. The targeted brood warrior convulsed, its metallic limbs flailing. It stumbled and fell, its inner light dimming.
It worked!
Sulla yelled. But the other 11 now charged, crossing the cavern floor in a blur of motion. Their psychic screams became a deafening chorus.
We had the package! Fall back to the extraction point now!
Falco commanded. 2 of his team rookies named Ortega and Lee moved to secure the stunned creature with a magnetic net. The lead warrior reached them before they could react, its arm a blur.
It passed its bladed limb through Ortega's torso. The man's suit decompressed instantly, a cloud of frozen vapor erupting from the wound. Lee fired his kinetic rifle point blank into the creature's face, but the rounds flattened uselessly against its impenetrable hide. A second warrior flanked him, and a spray of bone-dissolving acid reduced his upper body to a steaming ruin.
Fall back!
Falco screamed, laying down cover fire while Gunnar and Sella dragged the netted warrior toward the breach. Another soldier, a woman named Iskra, bought them the final precious seconds they needed. She planted herself in the tunnel, her plasma thrower glowing white-hot.
For humanity, you bastards!
She bellowed, unleashing a continuous stream of fire that held back the tide. The Kytran swarmed her, their shells sizzling, and an avalanche of enraged metallic forms buried her. Falco, Gunnar, and Sella spilled out into space, the captured brood warrior in tow. They jetted toward their shuttle, locking their gazes on its airlock. 3 soldiers dead, for 1 sample. Falco stared at the netted, twitching creature they were dragging through space. Orlov had better know what he was doing. The research station designated Charon Base was a scar on the face of oblivion. It hung in the darkness of a dead star system, its primary star long since collapsed into a cold, lightless dwarf. On all official charts, the system was a navigational hazard, a graveyard of rogue asteroids and gravitational anomalies. The automated defense grid forbade entry under penalty of immediate kinetic strike, the perfect place to hide a secret. Inside, the station was a warren of sterile white corridors and polished chrome laboratories. The only color came from the hazard warning stenciled on the walls and the biocontainment field's deep, unsettling crimson. This was Dr. Orlov's kingdom. Falco and his 2 surviving team members watched from an observation deck as a series of robotic arms transferred the stasis-contained Kytran from their shuttle to the primary research lab. The creature was frozen mid-twitch.
What happens now?
Sella asked, her voice low. "Now," Falco said, fixing his eyes on the lab below, where Orlov and his team already worked. "We let the good doctor dissect our nightmares." Down in the lab, Orlov watched the brood warrior, his focus absolute. Meters of reinforced polysteel, transparent as glass, and a shimmering energy field separated them. "Begin the initial scan," Orlov instructed his team, his voice calm and measured over the lab's internal comm. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know its composition, what it breathes, what it dreams of when we put it to sleep." For weeks, the lab hummed with quiet, focused activity. They bombarded the creature with every sensor and scanner known to man. They took tissue samples with remote lasers, analyzed its genetic code, and mapped its synaptic pathways. They treated the living monster on their table as a complex biological puzzle. The first major discovery came 10 days into the analysis. A young geneticist, Dr. Niran Yoshi, called Orlov over to his console, his face pale.
"Doctor, you need to see this,"
Niran said, pointing to a sequence of glowing code on his screen.
"I've isolated the parasitic vector. It's a retrovirus, a novel form. It rewrites the host's reproductive genome. It forces the host's own body to gestate Kytran spawn, using the subject's biomass as fuel. A perfect parasite,"
Orlov murmured, a flicker of scientific fascination on his face.
"It makes the victim an accomplice in its own species' destruction. A far crueler fate than mere death." "That's not the worst of it,"
Niran said, his voice unsteady.
"The process, it's always fatal to the subject, every single time. It's absolute parasitism, ending in annihilation."
The discovery hardened everyone's resolve on the station. Project Chimera was a necessity. They fought a plague that sought to turn the galaxy's cradle into its coffin. But Orlov's attention fixed on a secondary finding, an anomaly. During the deep tissue scans, the subatomic imaging arrays detected strange, persistent fluctuations within the creature's cells. These fluctuations were like tiny, fleeting echoes in the fabric of space-time, particles winking in and out of existence in a pattern that defied known physics, an inexplicable variable in the equation. Orlov dedicated himself to the fluctuations. While the rest of his team worked on the retrovirus, he spent his days and nights before the subatomic phone data, convinced that this anomaly, this strange quirk of Chytran biology, was the key to everything. Far from the cold clinical halls of Charon Base, Ambassador Zyrella received the final message from the last Vey colony in the Eridanus system. Instead of a report or a plea for aid, it was a song, a low, mournful threatening, the traditional Vey hymn for the dead, broadcast on a looping open channel. It was a declaration that their fight was over. The song played for 3 hours, then the channel fell silent. Zyrella sat in the dark of her quarters for a long time, the echoes of that final song playing in her memory. Her people had vanished, reduced to a handful of refugees in a dying hymn. A weight settled on her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. Guilt. Her idealism, her belief in the conclave had cost her everything. She made her choice. She reopened the Hecate connection. This time, she transmitted every piece of Vey intelligence on Chytran biology, their movements and the weaknesses they had discovered at the cost of their own extinction. And then, she accessed Vey diplomatic transport manifest. She approved Vey-flagged freighters, ostensibly carrying refugee supplies to pick up shipments of rare isotopes, high-speed computing processors, and biofabrication materials from neutral ports. She provided Human Command with the altered flight plans and encrypted cargo logs. This shell game played with starships, a secret plea written in shipping manifest and transfer logs, was the only weapon she had left. The breakthrough, when it came, was a whisper. Dr. Orlov was staring at a holographic display showing the subatomic fluctuation data overlaid with the Chytran's primary genetic sequence. He had been awake for 54 hours, fueled by stimulants. Exhaustion rimmed his eyes and red, his face pallid. He was watching the way the phantom particles flickered in and out of existence, and how their rhythms seemed to mirror the Chytran DNA-specific non-coding regions, the so-called junk DNA his team had mostly ignored. On a hunch, he had the system run a comparative analysis, looking for a mathematical relationship between the subatomic frequency and the genetic structure. The computer chimed. A line of text appeared on screen. Correlation confirmed. 1 to 1. Orlov stared, trying to process the data. It contradicted known biological principles. He ran the analysis again. The same result. At last, he understood. The fluctuations were integral to the system. The Chytran were more than a hive mind in the traditional psychic sense. They were a subatomically entangled network. Every single Chytran in the galaxy connected to every other one at an entangled level. Their junk DNA served a purpose, a biological subatomic transceiver. This frequency sequence, as he now called it, was their shared consciousness, their species-wide nervous system, the source of their horrifying coordination. This was their greatest strength, and it will be their undoing, Orlov whispered to the empty lab. He had his weapon. Attacking their immune system or cellular structure was like trying to poison a single soldier in an army. He would instead target the network itself. He would design a virus that delivered a payload, a simple, elegant piece of code that would turn their subatomic network into a delivery mechanism for a fatal chain reaction failure, a genetic kill switch. He would kill them all at once, severing their collective soul. Commander Falco found Orlov in the main lab late one evening, staring at the brood warrior, which was still floating dormant in its containment cell. The only light came from the soft glow of the monitors in the containment field. A half-empty bottle of whiskey, contraband smuggled aboard by a sympathetic crewman, sat on the console beside him. Falco entered silently and poured himself a measure into a sterile laboratory beaker. "You've been quiet," Falco said, taking a sip from the harsh liquor. "I've been listening," Orlov replied, fixing his gaze on the Chytran. "To the static." Falco knew what he meant. The low-level psychic noise that permeated any space the Chytran had touched, a constant irritating reminder of their presence. My colony on Tantalus, Falco said, his voice low and rough, was among the first to fall. I was off-world on a training exercise. I watched it happen on a delayed feed for a recon drone. By the time my unit got there, it was over. He paused, swirling the whiskey in his beaker. When they build their memorials, when they show the vids on the news nets, they clean it up. They show the heroes, the ships fighting, the stoic faces. They cut out the raw parts. Orlov turned to look at him, searching Falco's face. I remember the real details, Falco said. The smoke. The fumes were different from the clean, black smoke in the vids. It was thick, yellow, and greasy from all the burning plastics and composites. And the static. The comms were just screaming and then static. That's how you knew a sector had fallen. The screaming stopped, and it was just noise. He drained his beaker and set it down with a sharp click. Vengeance is a luxury I can't afford, Doctor. I want an end to the noise. A final silence. Orlov looked from Falco's face to the alien creature in the tank, then refilled both their beakers. Silence is coming, Commander, he said. I promise you that. The test biosphere was a sealed, self-contained ecosystem housed in a large cargo bay. It stimulated the thin atmosphere and low gravity of a typical chytrin-infested moonlet. Inside, a small brood of a dozen bladelings, bred from the captured warriors' tissue samples, skittered and crawled over the simulated terrain. Orlov, Falco, and the entire senior research team watched from the reinforced observation deck. The contagion-designated Chimera 01 is ready for dispersal, a technician announced, her voice flat. Proceed, Orlov ordered. A fine, almost invisible mist seeped into the biosphere through a series of vents. For a full minute, the bladelings seemed unaffected. They continued their aimless movements, crawling over each other in their indifferent way. The first one stopped and shuddered, its metallic body vibrating at a high frequency. Its psychic signature, monitored on a nearby screen, spiked into a chaotic frenzy. It turned and attacked the bladeling nearest to it, its small, sharp limbs tearing its sibling's shell. Within seconds, the entire brood had descended into a rabid, cannibalistic chaos. They tore each other apart in a silent, horrific frenzy. Then, as the first of them died, its body broke down. The elegant metallic structure crumbled, its polished surfaces clouding over. It seemed to melt from the inside out, collapsing into a pool of viscous black sludge that steamed and corroded the rock it touched. One by one, the other bladelings succumbed, their frenzied attacks giving way to the same horrifying rapid deliquescence. In less than 5 minutes, the biosphere was empty of all life. All that remained were a dozen pools of bubbling, corrosive ooze. The test was a success, a horrifying, sickening, absolute success. The observation room was silent. Someone swore under their breath. Another turned away from the viewport, sickened by the sight of the bubbling ruin. They had just witnessed the birth of a plague, a weapon of such comprehensive horror that it made a simple fusion bomb seem merciful. And in the abyss of its creation, they saw their own reflection. The order came from General Kane himself, transmitted over an entanglement comm that was effectively instantaneous and untraceable. Deployment authorized. Target, Legaia 3. Execute. Legaia 3 was an insignificant airless rock orbiting a gas giant at the contested zone's edge. But it had become a major staging ground for the chytrin, a forward base from which they launched their assaults deeper into human space. Taking it with conventional forces would cost them a dozen capital ships and tens of thousands of lives. Human Command tasked his team with the delivery. They flew in on a stealth ship, its hull coated in sensor-baffling materials that rendered it a ghost on enemy scopes. The weapon was a single modified torpedo. They replaced its warhead with a pressurized container holding a liter of Chimera agent, enough to exterminate every chytrin in the system.
The launch protocol required simultaneous encryption authorization from two parties, Falco on site and a designated flag officer back at Human Command. A two-key system to unleash hell. Falco stood on the bridge of his ship, the target moon filling the main view screen. Long-range sensors showed dense chytrin concentrations. "We're in position, Commander," his pilot said, "awaiting your authorization." Falco took a deep breath. He thought of Tantalus. He thought of yellow smoke and screaming static. He placed his thumb on the biometric scanner. "Commander Garrick Falco, Strike Team Epsilon, authorization code Omega Black. I confirm the target and give my consent to launch." A synthesized, cold voice echoed from the comms panel. "Human Command confirms. Authorization granted. May God have mercy on our souls." "Launch torpedo," Falco ordered, his voice hollow. A torpedo shot from the ship, a silver dart in the blackness. It streaked toward the moon, its course unerring. It detonated before impact. As it entered the moon's thin, negligible exosphere, it detonated in a silent, blossoming cloud of aerosolized agent. The mission was complete. They turned the ship around and fled, the results already a certainty. Days later, back at Charon Base, the reports came in. Long-range sensor platforms positioned to observe the rock relayed their findings. First, the psychic static from the worldlet had intensified into a single galaxy-spanning scream of agony that lasted for 4 hours before abruptly ceasing. The life signs vanished. Entire regions at a time winked out of existence as the contagion spread through the entanglement network. Within 48 hours, every chytrin life sign on Ligeia 3 had vanished. The moon itself was now a Class 4 biohazard. A necrotic sludge left by the dying chytrin had rendered its surface a sterile, lethally corrosive mire. It had become a dead world, poisoned for 1,000,000 years. Falco watched the final report on the main screen in the station's briefing room. No triumph rose in him, no satisfaction, just a hollow space where something used to be. They had won. The war changed, and they had paid for it with something essential. News about the victory spread, first as whispers, then as undeniable fact. Entire chytrin hives, previously unstoppable, were collapsing. Worlds on the brink of annihilation found sudden, inexplicable salvation. The tide was turning. The galactic conclave erupted with outrage and raw primal fear. A formal announcement proved unnecessary. Only one thing could cause such a perfect, systematic collapse: biological warfare. Genocide on a scale previously thought unimaginable. And humanity, the scrappy, desperate upstarts, had broken the single most sacred law in the galaxy. They were heroes to the worlds they had saved, and monsters to everyone else. But amid the political firestorm, an unassuming Vey diplomat shuttle defied the new quarantine zones and requested permission to dock at Charon Base. On board was Ambassador Zyrella. She met Falco and Orlov in a sterile conference room. She had aged decades in the last few months. The graceful, idealistic orator had vanished, replaced by a woman whose eyes were cold, her gaze fixed on something distant. The patterns under her skin had gone inert, leaving it a flat, stony gray. "The Conclave has branded your species as war criminals," she said, her voice devoid of its former melodic cadence. "They are debating sanctions, expulsion, even a punitive war once they deal with the chytrin threat." "Let them," Falco grunted. "We're a little busy saving their ungrateful hides." Zyrella turned from him, fixing her gaze on Orlov. "Your weapon works. I've seen the reports from my own intelligence network. Hives on the edge of Vey space are dissolving." "It is efficient," Orlov stated, his tone as clinical as ever. "It is insufficient," Zyrella countered. "It is spreading, yes, but too slowly. The core of their strength, their world-sized arc, and the brood mother that commands them, has heavy shielding both physically and psychically. They are adapting
trying to cut off infected hives from their entanglement network. Your plague might win the war, but it will take years, and my people lack that time.
She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table.
I need the contagion. I need you to give it to me, so my remaining forces can deliver it directly to the Ark.
Orlov and Falco exchanged a look. This was an unexpected escalation.
That's not all, Zarella said, her voice dropping. A direct assault on the Ark is suicide. The Kytran numbers are too great. My soldiers are brave, and their strength is insufficient.
She looked directly at Falco, her expression pleading.
I have studied your military history. Your special forces employ enhancements, combat augmentations, and other forbidden technology.
Falco's stomach tightened. You want us to give you our plague and turn your soldiers into super soldiers, Falco said, his voice hard. You want us to break every rule there is.
Zarella's expression was unyielding. The rules are for people who have the luxury of a future. I am fighting for the memory of my species. I will embrace any measure required. The question is, will you?
The medical bay on Charon base transformed. Orlov's biological expertise, it turned out, extended beyond destruction. Working with Vey volunteers, the last handful of soldiers from Zarella's own honor guard, his medical team augmented them. The procedure was brutal and invasive. The Vey's elegant, slender physiology was ill-suited for the crude, powerful cybernetics of human design. Surgeons grafted biolink targeting systems directly onto their optical nerves, wove reinforced myomer bundles, artificial muscle fibers, into their own musculature, granting them strength and speed far beyond their natural capabilities, and implanted adrenal regulators and pain inhibitors at the base of their skulls. Falco watched the procedure from an observation window. A young Vey male, his face contorted in agony, convulsed on the operating table as surgeons fused the cybernetic linkage to his spine. They were forging a sword by shattering the people they were trying to save, remaking them into something harder, colder, and more like the humans who were their desperate, damned saviors. The Vey endured it with a terrifying resolve. To them, it was a consecration. They were becoming weapons, living embodiments of their species' will to survive. Combined intelligence from the human long-range sensors and the Vey's desperate network of refugee informants pinpointed the Ark's location. It hid deep within the turbulent, fiery corona of a gas giant, using the parent star's radiation and gravitational distortion to mask its presence. The final plan was as simple as it was suicidal. A joint fleet composed of the human Navy's last remnants and every operational Vey ship would engage the Ark. Their goal was to create a diversion to punch a single, temporary hole in its defenses. Through that hole, Falco would lead an elite strike team. His own soldiers were a seasoned collection of survivors drawn from the remnants of a dozen shattered units, with Gunnar and Sella serving as his lieutenants. Alongside them stood a cadre of newly augmented Vey warriors. Their mission: breach the Ark's organic hull, fight their way to its central chamber, and deliver the killing blow to the weakened broodmother. It was a spear tip aimed at the monster's heart. The briefing before the battle was quiet and somber. Falco stood before his mixed team. The Vey stood taller now, their movements sharper, their eyes glowing with the faint blue light of their targeting implants. They were beautiful and terrible. We are the last resort, Falco told them, his voice echoing in the hangar bay. History will forget what we do today. If we succeed, the Conclave will condemn us. If we fail, only silence will write the history. Look at the person next to you. Human or Vey, we are one force now. We are all that's left. Let's make it count. The Battle of Giants was a maelstrom of light and destruction. The Allied fleet dropped out of hyperspace into the gas giant's corona, the ambient heat and radiation alarms screaming on every bridge. The Kytran Ark was a sight of cosmic horror. A biomechanical moon, kilometers in diameter, its surface a shifting landscape of luminous structures and pulsating fleshy membranes.
Thousands of smaller Kytran ships, light fighter-sized blades from the main body, swarmed the Ark to meet them. The fleets joined the battle. Human battleships, cumbersome and powerful, formed a defensive wall, their massive railguns firing slugs of incandescent metal. They absorbed the Kytran assault's brunt, their shields flaring and buckling under the onslaught of organic projectiles and acid streams. The smaller, faster V cruisers, piloted by the augmented crews, moved with a newfound lethal fluidity. They weaved through the chaos, their particle casters carving clean lines of destruction through the enemy swarm. Falco's insertion craft, the Last Word, hugged a human destroyer's hull, using it as a shield as they plunged toward the Ark.
Breaching window in 30 seconds!
The pilot yelled over the roar of explosions.
It's gonna be hot!
A V cruiser, its engines flaring, made a final, suicidal run at the Ark's surface. It fired its main weapon one last time, tearing a gaping, molten wound in the organic hull before the Ark's defenses consumed it.
That's our door! Go, go, go!
Falco yelled. The Last Word shot through the newly created opening, plunging into the Kytran Ark's dark, fleshy interior.
Inside the Ark was a biological nightmare. The corridors were grown from pulsating veined flesh, slick with foul-smelling secretion. The air was thick and humid, tasting of rust and decay. Gravity was a strange, shifting force, pulling them in odd directions. Almost immediately, warriors attacked them. Kytran warriors, larger and more grotesque than they had seen before, emerged from the walls themselves, their bodies forming from the living architecture. This was where the augmented V proved their worth. They moved with a speed and lethal accuracy that was inhuman. Their targeting systems locked into the creature's nerve clusters, and their enhanced limbs tore through the metallic shells with brutal efficiency. A V warrior, the patterns under his skin pulsing a cold gray, decapitated a warrior with a single fluid strike of his combat blade, while another fired her rifle with astounding accuracy, each shot finding an unarmored joint. Falco and his human soldiers fought alongside them, a solid, pragmatic core in the whirlwind of V fury. They moved deeper into the Ark, a single determined organism of violence following the psychic trail toward the broodmother. The hive mind was a deafening roar in their skulls now, a tidal wave of concentrated malice. They fought through the chambers filled with gestating sex, past rivers of acidic digestive fluid, and across bridges of living bone. Every step was a battle. Every meter gained cost them blood and ammunition, but they pushed on, driven by the certainty that there was only one way forward. They breached the final membrane and entered the Ark's central nexus. The chamber was a vast space of living flesh. In the center, thick, umbilical-like cables suspended the broodmother. It was a mountain of pulsating, cancerous tissue. It was wounded back. Black, necrotic patches covered its flesh where the contagion had taken hold. But the creature's immense life force was actively fighting the infection, cauterizing the decay with furious regeneration. The plague had reached it, but it was not enough to kill it. It was still alive, and still immensely powerful. As they stepped into the chamber, the psychic roar in their heads stopped. A soft, telepathic whisper replaced it, speaking directly to their souls.
Peace, it whispered. The war is over. Your struggle has ended.
The V soldiers faltered. The blue combat light in their augmented eyes dimmed. The chamber around them dissolved. The elegant, luminous spires of V Prime replaced the fleshy walls. The scent of moon blossoms filled the air where the stench of decay had been. And standing before them were their families, their loved ones, their dead children, smiling, their arms outstretched.
We can be whole again,
The broodmother crooned, weaving a tapestry of perfect, resplendent hope.
I can restore all that you lost. Lay down your arms. Join me. Be at peace.
The V warriors stared, their faces etched with an agony of longing. One of them dropped her rifle, a single glittering tear tracing a path down her cheek. The vision trapped them, their resolve shattered by a weapon against which their resolve was powerless, their own grief. The psychic wave washed over Falco, and the wave threw him too into a vision. He was standing on a hill overlooking his home colony on Tantalus. The sun was warm, the sky was a perfect cloudless blue. His wife was there, her hand on his. His daughter was chasing a butterfly in a field of green grass. The scene was everything he had lost, everything he had fought for. It was idyllic, and that was the flaw. The vision was too idyllic, too clean. Where's the smoke? He thought, his mind clinging to the one piece of reality he had left. Where's the static? The memory he clung to, the ugly, traumatic memory of yellow smoke and the screaming calms, was his anchor. It was the truth. This beautiful vision was a lie. With a roar of defiant will, he broke free from the illusion. The beautiful field dissolved back into the Ark's fleshy, dying heart. The Vey still stood frozen, lost in their dreams of a dead world. The broodmother pulsed, focusing its remaining energy on holding them in thrall. Falco raised his kinetic rifle. The targeting laser painted a single red dot on a large pulsating nerve cluster in the broodmother's mass. It was the creature's brain, its central processing unit, the telepathic assault's source. He fired, silent and decisive. Vengeance was a luxury. He just wanted the silence. The tungsten round tore through the membrane, severing the nerve cluster. The telepathic whisper in their minds vanished as if cut by a switch. A final psychic scream of absolute agony and shock replaced it, echoing across the galaxy, and then silence. The chamber went utterly, completely quiet. The visions in the Vey warriors' minds shattered, and they looked around, confused, their faces streaked with real tears. The Ark shuddered, a deep, convulsive tremor. Its life force had vanished. The Queen is dead, Falco's exhausted voice stated into his calm. He turned to the stunned Vey warriors. Let's go home. They fought their way back out of a dying god, the Ark collapsing around them. When their shuttle broke free into the fiery chaos of the gas giant's corona, the Allied fleet, battered but victorious, was waiting for them. Across the hangar bay of the human flagship, Falk caught Ambassador Zarella's eye. The look they shared said everything. They had won, saving the galaxy by committing an unforgivable sin. They had become the monsters needed to slay the monster. Dr. Orlov, alone in his lab trillions of miles away, watched the broodmother's psychic signature flatline. He typed a final command into his console. Delete Project Chimera. The command instantly erased all files, all research, all data. He had finished his work. History would remember humanity as genocidal war criminals. It would make them pariahs, feared and reviled, but alive. And in the profound, aching silence where the Kytran's psychic scream used to be, there was room for a new galaxy to grow, built on the ashes of a terrible choice. Theirs was a grim, quiet, and terrible victory, but a victory nonetheless. The universe was safe, and the noise had vanished, and that was enough.